The boy stands in front of the American doctor, eyes half open, mouth tasting like copper. He coughs once, hard enough that his ribs hurt, and then he sees it. Blood on his palm. Not a lot, but enough that the nurse steps back. The doctor freezes, pen still in hand, staring at the red smear on the boy's skin. The boy is 20 years old, German, and just arrived at a United States prisoner of war camp somewhere in the Midwest in late 1945. The exam was supposed to be routine, but the blood changes everything. Because what the doctor is about to find is not just tuberculosis, not just starvation, and not just exhaustion. It is something far worse, something the boy has been hiding since the day he was captured, and something that will force the camp to rewrite its entire medical protocol. The truck stops outside the gate, engine still ticking hot from the drive. 14 prisoners step out, hands tied loosely with rope, faces blank, eyes looking at nothing. Most of them are older, men in their 30s and 40s, Wehrmacht soldiers captured in the final collapse of Germany. But one of them is different. He is 20 years old, thin but not skeletal, and he walks with his head down, not in shame but in careful control. His name is Felix Becker, and he has been a prisoner for 6 weeks. The guards do not notice him at first. He does not cause trouble, he does not complain, and he does not ask questions. But inside his chest, something is breaking. He has been coughing for 3 days, dry at first, then wet, then bitter. This morning, on the transport from the holding camp in New Jersey, he coughed into his fist and tasted metal. He wiped it on his pants before anyone could see. Now, standing in line for intake processing, he can feel it building again. His throat tightens, his lungs burn, and when he swallows, it feels like gravel. He knows what is coming. He just does not know if he can hide it anymore. The guards lead the prisoners into a wooden building with peeling paint and a row of tables. This is the medical intake station. Every prisoner who enters a United States camp must pass a basic exam. Height, weight, visible injuries, signs of disease. It is not meant to be invasive. It is meant to be fast. But the American military learned early that skipping this step leads to outbreaks, deaths, and political disasters. Felix steps forward when his number is called. The doctor is a captain, middle-aged, tired, with reading glasses perched on his nose. The nurse is younger, efficient, already filling out forms before Felix even sits down. The doctor gestures to the chair. Felix sits, and then he coughs. Felix coughs once and the room changes. The cough is violent, sharp, loud enough that the guard at the door turns his head. Felix covers his mouth with his hand, but when he pulls it away, everyone sees it. Blood. Not bright red, not arterial, but dark, almost brown, mixed with mucus and saliva. The nurse takes a half step back. The doctor sets his pen down and stands. Felix does not say anything. He just looks at his hand, then at the doctor, waiting for the order he knows is coming. The doctor does not shout. He does not call for guards. He speaks quietly to the nurse, who nods and leaves the room. Then he looks at Felix and asks, in clear but accented German, how long this has been happening. Felix hesitates. The truth is complicated, and he is not sure how much he should say. But the doctor is not moving, not writing, just waiting. So Felix tells him, 3 days of coughing, no fever, no night sweats, no weight loss that he has noticed. The doctor asks if he has had tuberculosis. Felix says no. The doctor asks if anyone in his unit had tuberculosis. Felix says he does not know. The doctor writes something down, then tells Felix to stay in the chair. Do not move. Do not touch anything. 2 guards enter, along with a second doctor and a medic carrying a leather bag. Felix is told to stand, turn around, lift his shirt. They check his back for lesions, his neck for swollen nodes, his armpits and groin for signs of infection. They find nothing obvious. His skin is pale but intact. His breathing is labored but steady. There is no rash, no visible abscess, no open wound. The second doctor exchanges a look with the first. This is not tuberculosis. Or if it is not presenting the way it should. Let us know in the comments where you are watching this from. Are you in the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, or somewhere else? If you want to dive even deeper into these untold stories, consider becoming a channel member. You'll get your name mentioned in the video, early access to videos, exclusive content, and direct input on which stories we cover next. Join our inner circle of history keepers. Felix is moved to a different building. We are now in a small isolation ward with 4 beds and barred windows. late April 1945. This is where prisoners with suspected contagious diseases are held until they can be diagnosed or cleared. Felix is told to lie down and wait. The nurse returns with a glass of water and a metal basin. If he coughs again, he is to spit into the basin. Do not swallow it. Do not wipe it on the sheets. Felix lies back and stares at the ceiling. He knows what they are thinking. Tuberculosis killed more prisoners of war in some camps than combat ever did. It spreads fast, it hides well, and it does not care about nationality. If Felix has it, and if he infected the other 13 men on the transport, the camp is looking at a quarantine, an investigation, and a scandal. But Felix also knows something the doctors do not. He does not have tuberculosis. What he has is worse. Not worse for the camp, but worse for him. Because tuberculosis can be treated, isolated, and survived. What Felix has is something the doctors have not seen yet, something that does not show up in textbooks, and something that will require them to look back at where he has been, not just where he is now. Felix closes his eyes and waits. He does not sleep. He just listens to his own breathing and wonders how long it will take for them to figure it out. Outside the isolation ward, the camp doctor, Captain Raymond Ford, is reading Felix's intake file. Age 20, captured near Kassel in January, processed in France, transferred to the United States in March. No prior medical complaints, no family history of lung disease. Ford circles the word France and writes a note in the margin. Check transit camp records. He does not know yet what he is looking for, but he knows that blood does not come from nowhere. We are now in Felix's memory, 3 months earlier in a transit camp in France. The war is collapsing. The German army is gone, the cities are rubble, and the prisoners are piling up faster than the Allies can process them. Felix is one of thousands. He was captured in January 1945 during the final defense of a supply depot outside Kassel. The fighting lasted 4 hours. Felix fired 11 rounds from his rifle, hid in a cellar, and surrendered when the building was set on fire. He was lucky. Most of his unit died. Felix was taken to a holding area, searched, tagged, and loaded onto a truck with 40 other prisoners. The truck drove west for 2 days, stopping only for fuel and bathroom breaks. Felix did not eat, not because there was no food, but because another prisoner, an older man with a scar on his face, told him the Americans sometimes poisoned the first meals. Felix did not believe this, but he was too tired to argue. On the 3rd day, they arrived at a transit camp in France. This is where the processing began. Name, rank, unit, capture location. Felix gave all of it. He was polite, quiet, and cooperative. The American sergeant in charge barely looked at him, but something happened in France that Felix does not talk about. He was assigned to a work detail, clearing rubble from a bombed railway station. The work was hard, the supervision was loose, and the rations were inconsistent. On the 5th day, Felix was told to move a pile of concrete blocks from one end of the yard to the other. He worked for 6 hours without a break. By the end of the shift, his hands were bleeding, his back was screaming, and he could barely stand. That night in the barracks, he coughed for the first time. Just a dry tickle, nothing serious. But the man in the bunk next to him, a former medic named Otto, listened carefully and said something that made Felix go cold. "You are coughing from the lungs, not the throat. That means dust or blood or both." Felix is back in the isolation ward in the United States, but his mind is still in France. He remembers the dust. Concrete dust, brick dust, ash from burned wood and metal. It hung in the air like fog, and every time Felix swung a sledgehammer or lifted a block, it rose in clouds that coated his skin, his clothes, and his lungs. No one gave him a mask. No one gave him water breaks. No one told him to stop when he started coughing. The work detail lasted 2 weeks. By the end, Felix was coughing every night. Sometimes dry, sometimes wet, sometimes with a faint pink tinge when he spat into the dirt. He did not report to the camp doctor. He was afraid. Afraid they would think he was faking, afraid they would put him in isolation, afraid they would decide he was too sick to transfer and leave him in France forever. So he stayed quiet, kept working, and hoped it would stop. It did not stop. By the time he was transferred to the United States 3 weeks later, the cough was constant. He hid it as best he could, coughing into his sleeve, turning his face away, pretending to clear his throat. But on the ship across the Atlantic, another prisoner noticed. A man named Hans, A former factory worker from Munich asked Felix if he was sick. Felix said no. Hans said, "Then why do you cough like a coal miner?" Felix did not answer. He just walked away. Now, lying in the isolation ward, Felix wonders if Hans is still alive, if he made it to a different camp, if he is coughing too. Because Felix was not the only one on that work detail. There were 20 other prisoners, all of them breathing the same dust, all of them working without masks, all of them coughing by the end. Felix does not know what happened to them. He just knows that he is here and they are not, and that makes him feel something he cannot name. We are back in the present in Captain Ford's office. Ford has Felix's intake file, the X-ray request form, and a cup of cold coffee. He has been working in prisoner of war medicine for 18 months. He has seen malnutrition, frostbite, gangrene, typhus, and every strain of dysentery the European theater has to offer. But he has never seen a case like Felix. The boy is young, not emaciated, not feverish, and not showing any of the classic tuberculosis markers. Yet he is coughing blood. Ford orders a chest X-ray, a sputum test, and a full blood panel. The X-ray takes 2 days to process. The sputum test takes 4. The blood panel comes back first and it tells Ford almost nothing. Felix is anemic, mildly dehydrated, and his white blood cell count is slightly elevated. But none of that explains the blood. Ford sits at his desk and stares at the file. He is missing something. Something in Felix's history, something in the timeline, something that does not fit the tuberculosis pattern. Then he sees it. The note he wrote in the margin. Check transit camp records. Ford picks up the phone and calls the records office. He asks for the file on the transit camp in France where Felix was processed. The clerk says it will take a week. Ford says he needs it in 2 days. The clerk sighs and says he will try. Ford hangs up and goes back to the isolation ward. He needs to talk to Felix again. Felix is sitting on the edge of the bed, drinking water when Ford walks in. Ford pulls up a chair and sits down. He does not bring a clipboard, he does not bring a nurse, he just sits and looks at Felix. Then he asks the question he has been avoiding. Did you inhale anything unusual in the last 3 months? Felix pauses. Ford repeats the question. Felix looks at the translator, then back at Ford and finally says yes. Concrete dust, brick dust, ash. For hours at a time, without a mask, without water, without breaks. Ford closes his eyes and exhales slowly. That is it. That is the answer. Felix does not have tuberculosis. He has what Ford will later write up as acute inhalation injury with secondary hemorrhagic bronchitis. The dust Felix inhaled in France tore up the lining of his airways, causing inflammation, bleeding, and scarring. The coughing is his body trying to clear the damage. The blood is from the torn tissue. It is not contagious. It is not fatal, but it is serious. Ford explains this to Felix in German, slowly, carefully, making sure every word is understood. Felix listens without speaking. When Ford finishes, Felix asks one question. Will it get better? Ford says yes if you rest, drink fluids, and avoid further dust exposure. Felix nods. Then he asks another question. Did the other prisoners get this too? Ford does not know the answer to that. He says he will find out. Felix nods again and lies back down. Ford leaves the isolation ward and walks straight to the camp commander's office. Colonel James Pritchard is sitting behind his desk, reading a logistics report when Ford walks in without knocking. Pritchard looks up annoyed, but Ford does not apologize. He drops Felix's file on the desk and says 4 words. We caused this injury. Pritchard picks up the file and reads. His expression does not change, but his jaw tightens. Now we move forward to the moment the camp commander has to decide what to do next. Colonel Pritchard calls a meeting. Present are Ford, the camp operations officer, the provost marshal, and the head of prisoner labor assignments. We are now in Pritchard's office, 2 hours after Ford delivered Felix's file. Pritchard is not happy. He has been running this camp for 9 months, and he has prided himself on maintaining discipline, efficiency, and compliance with the Geneva Convention. Now he has a German prisoner with a lung injury caused by American negligence, and if that gets into the press or into the Red Cross reports, it will be a disaster. Pritchard asks Ford if Felix is going to die. Ford says no. Pritchard asks if Felix can work. Ford says not for at least 2 weeks. Pritchard asks if Felix has complained or filed a grievance. Ford says no. Pritchard nods. then turns to the operations officer and says one sentence that everyone in the room remembers. Make sure this does not happen again. The operations officer asks what that means in practice. Pritchard says it means new rules for transit camps, dust masks for prisoners on rubble details, water breaks every 2 hours, not every 6, medical checks before and after heavy labor. The provost marshal, a major named Kellerman, raises a concern. If we change the rules now, it looks like an admission of guilt. Pritchard stares at him for 3 seconds, then says, "It is an admission of guilt. We injured a prisoner through negligence. That is a fact. The question is whether we fix it or ignore it." Kellerman does not respond. Ford speaks up. He says Felix was not the only one on that work detail. There were 20 other prisoners. Pritchard asks if any of them are in this camp. Ford says he does not know yet. Pritchard tells the operations officer to track down the other 19 prisoners from that work detail. Find out where they are, check their medical records, and report back in 48 hours. The operations officer nods and leaves. Pritchard looks at Ford and asks one more question. "Did you write this up in Felix's file?" Ford says yes. Pritchard says good. "Then it is on record. If anyone asks, we documented it, we fixed it, and we made sure it does not happen again." The meeting ends. Ford walks out, feeling something he has not felt in months. Not pride, not relief, but something close to hope. Felix spends 9 days in the isolation ward. We are now in early May 1945, and the war in Europe is almost over. The follow-up X-ray shows improvement. The bleeding stops after 5 days. His cough becomes dry again, then fades to an occasional tickle. Ford clears him for light duty, which means kitchen work, laundry sorting, and administrative tasks. Felix is assigned to the camp library, a small room with donated books in English, German, and French. His job is to organize them, check them in and out, and keep the space clean. It is quiet work, easy work, and Felix is grateful for it. He reads in the afternoons when the library is empty. He reads novels, histories, and medical journals that Ford loans him. He does not talk much. He does not make friends. He just works, reads, and waits for the war to end. The other prisoners notice him but do not bother him. There is an unspoken understanding in the camp. Some men want to talk, some men want to forget, and some men just want to be left alone. Felix is the third type. One afternoon, a prisoner named Ernst comes into the library. Ernst is older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a missing finger on his left hand. He asks Felix if he has any books about America. Felix shows him 3. Ernst picks one, a travel guide to New York City, and sits down to read. After a few minutes, he looks up and asks Felix where he is from. Felix says Kassel. Ernst nods. "I am from Dresden," he says. There is nothing left. Felix does not know what to say, so he says nothing. Ernst goes back to reading. If you are enjoying this story and want more untold accounts from World War II prisoners of war, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are bringing you stories that most history books never covered. Felix's story is not unique. Thousands of prisoners faced injuries, illness, and uncertainty in the final months of the war. But each story mattered, and each one changed something, even if only in small ways. Now we move forward to the moment Germany surrenders, and the prisoners have to decide what happens next. In early May 1945, the camp receives news that Germany has surrendered. We are now in the main barracks. Evening. Prisoners gathered around a radio that one of the guards turned on. The announcement is in English, but everyone understands. The war in Europe is over. The prisoners react in different ways. Some cry, some cheer, some sit in silence staring at nothing. Felix feels nothing. He has no family to go back to, no home to rebuild, no future to imagine. His father died in 1943, killed in an air raid. His mother died when he was 12. He has no siblings, no cousins, no one waiting for him. The only thing he knows for certain is that he survived. That night in the barracks, Ernst asks him what he will do when he is sent home. Felix says he does not know. Ernst says that is the only honest answer anyone has given in weeks. The two men sit in silence for a while, then Ernst says something Felix will never forget. Surviving is not the same as living, but it is a start. The next day, the camp commander announces that repatriation will begin in June. Prisoners will be processed in groups, starting with the sick and the wounded, then by age, then by rank. Felix is young and healthy, so he will be in one of the later groups. That means he has 2 more months in the camp, 2 more months of library work, reading and waiting. He does not mind. He has nowhere else to be. During those 2 months, Felix keeps reading. He reads about medicine, about America, about the war, about Reconstruction. He does not talk to the other prisoners much, but he listens. He hears their plans, their fears, their hopes. Some want to go back to their families. Some want to emigrate. Some want to forget everything and start over. Felix does not know what he wants. He just knows that when he gets home, if there is a home to go to, he will have to figure it out one day at a time. Felix is released in July 1945. We are now at the camp gate, early morning, prisoners lined up with discharge papers and train tickets. Felix is given a clean uniform, a set of documents, and a ticket to a repatriation center in Bremen. He boards a bus with 60 other former prisoners, most of them silent, most of them thin, most of them looking out the window as the American countryside disappears behind them. The journey takes 2 weeks. They cross the Atlantic on a transport ship, sleep in hammocks, eat canned food, and listen to the engine rumble day and night. The ship is crowded, noisy, and smells like diesel fuel and sweat. Felix does not mind. He has been in worse places. When they arrive in Bremen, the city is unrecognizable. Entire blocks are gone. The harbor is full of sunken ships. The streets are full of refugees, soldiers, and black market traders. Felix walks through it all, papers in hand, looking for the repatriation office. He finds it in a bombed-out school building. He waits in line for 3 hours. When his turn comes, the clerk asks him where he wants to go. Felix says he has no family, no home, and no plan. The clerk stamps his papers and tells him to report to a labor camp in the Ruhr Valley. Felix nods and leaves. He does not ask questions. He does not complain. He just walks to the train station and buys a ticket. The train is packed, standing room only, and takes 8 hours to reach the Ruhr. Felix arrives at the labor camp in the evening. It is not a prison, not a military facility, just a collection of wooden barracks where displaced workers live while they clear rubble and rebuild infrastructure. Felix is assigned a bunk, given a meal, and told to report for work at 6 in the morning. He eats, lies down, and stares at the ceiling. He is back in Germany, but it does not feel like home. It feels like another camp, another holding area, another place where he is waiting for something he cannot name. Felix works in the Ruhr for 2 years. We are now in 1947 and Germany is slowly rebuilding. Felix clears rubble, rebuilds roads, and sleeps in barracks that smell like mold and sweat. He does not complain. He does not write letters. He does not think about the camp in the United States or the doctor who wrote in his file or the dust that almost killed him. He just works. In 1947, he is hired by a construction company. The pay is low, the hours are long, but it is steady work. Felix saves his money and rents a small apartment in Essen. In 1950, he marries a woman named Greta, a nurse from Hamburg. They meet at a church social, and Felix does not tell her about the war, the capture, or the blood. He just tells her he was a soldier, he survived, and he wants to build a life. Greta does not ask for more. She has her own scars, her own silences. They understand each other. In 1953, they have a daughter. Felix names her Anna after his mother. He never tells Anna about the camp, the isolation ward, or the American doctor who believed him. Felix dies in 1998 at the age of 73 from heart failure. His daughter finds a box of papers in his apartment after the funeral. Inside are his discharge papers, his repatriation documents, and a single photograph of a prisoner of war camp in the United States. On the back, in faded ink, is one sentence: "I survived because someone wrote it down." Anna does not know what it means. She keeps the photograph anyway. Captain Raymond Ford leaves the Army in 1946 and opens a private practice in Ohio. He never forgets Felix, and he never stops writing about prisoner labor injuries. In 1948, he publishes a paper in a military medical journal titled "Preventable Respiratory Injuries in Prisoner Populations: Lessons from 1945." The paper is read by 12 people and ignored by everyone else. But it is cited in a 1951 Red Cross report on prisoner treatment, and that report influences the 1954 update to the Geneva Convention. Ford does not know this. He dies in 1979, believing his work made no difference. But it did. Let us talk about the scale. Between 1943 and 1946, the United States held over 400,000 German prisoners of war in camps across the country. Most were captured in North Africa, Italy, and France. Most were held for 1 to 3 years. Most returned home alive. The death rate for German prisoners in American camps was less than 1%, one of the lowest in the war. But that does not mean the experience was easy. Prisoners worked in agriculture, construction, logging, and manufacturing. They earned 80 cents per day, paid in camp currency. They lived in barracks, ate military rations, and followed strict schedules. Medical care was provided, but it was basic. Injuries were common. Illness was common. And some injuries, like Felix's, were entirely preventable. The Geneva Convention of 1929 required that prisoners of war receive medical care equivalent to that provided to the captor's own troops. The United States followed this rule mostly, but transit camps, labor details, and administrative gaps created situations where prisoners were overworked, undersupervised, and injured. Felix was one of them. He was not the first. He was not the last. But his case was documented, and that documentation mattered. Because in war, what gets written down is what gets remembered, and what gets remembered is what gets fixed. Felix Becker coughed blood in 1945. A doctor believed him. A colonel changed a rule. And 80 years later, we are still talking about it. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was heroic, but because it was real. And real stories, the ones about dust and coughing and policy memos, are the ones that show us what war actually costs.